This week on the Eldritch Lorecast.
People wanting to get in there and homebrew stuff and make their own things for Draw Steel.
And that Chris is more interested in the playful elements of AI.
You know, I'm interested in the playful elements of huffing car exhaust.
I had another thought about YouTube. Ben, this is another reason why you're wrong.
That's what my character would do. Everyone hates that.
The way that people create in response to your thing is a huge factor in its success.
Grim Hollow Kickstarter is only 2 weeks away, almost to the date.
Boopity bop, zip zap boing, boopity boop.
All that and more right now. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the Eldritch Lorecast, the #1 tabletop RPG podcast in all the realms. My name is Ben Byrne, and I am joined, as always, never not, Dael Kingsmill, Shawn Merwin, James Hake. And James, I'm going to ask you probably the most important question, the most important piece of advice we could ever give anybody who plays RPGs on this podcast. Here it comes. How do you successfully schedule your games? What have you found works for you?
I leave it to one of my players. I say, I do so much for you already. You guys figure it out. And they do.
Fair.
Usually we wind up playing on the same day every week unless something, bad arises, some conflict or something. And I switch off every week with one of my players who DMs a different campaign.
Look, When to Meet is a magical tool, particularly if you're going across time zones. I am a very big fan of it. It is good. But other than that, the closest I've come...
Sorry, When to Meet is the name of like an app?
When to Meet. It's just an app or a webpage.
I thought you just meant generally.
No, I do indeed mean the product that it's not paid. So you know what I'm saying though. But it's just great because it just has a grid of the times in your time zone, and you put in your little blocks and other people put in their little blocks, and it overlaps, and the strongest colors are when the most people could meet. It's very handy, very useful. You don't have to faff about with time zones. Love that for me. But the closest I've gotten to successful like ongoing campaigns is doing a rudimentary, like, what days do people work? All right, we are playing every, Thursday at 6 p.m. That is the time we're playing. If you can't make it, you can't make it. And just kind of being a little bit of a hot ass.
The next session of our Citadel Dancing Sun game will be the last.
Ooh.
And we did sort of what Dael said. It's, okay, when can we all meet? All right, it's every other Friday. Let's do every other Friday. And it's turned into every 7th or 8th Friday when people can actually work through their family stuff. And so now I have this decision because I have people who say, hey, I'd love to play with you. Do you run a home game? And I'm like, well, I do, but it's this. And now I'm at the point where I'm going to say, hey, team, there are other people that want to play, and we'll set aside time regularly. So do you want to set a time and stick to it? Or do you want to just roll the dice and I'm going to reach out to other folks and put together a game, and you're welcome to join, or you're welcome to go get bent. Your choice. So I'm trying on the hard ass hat, and I'm very bad at it. I could do it once, and then as soon as someone says, but what about, I'm like, oh, okay, I understand. And so I'm wrestling with that problem right now.
I'm in a similar place, which is why I asked this question, because the solution we came to was kind of similar to Dael's, in that and similar, I think, to what James said a little bit as well, is like we picked way back in the day, like 6-7 years ago, Thursday night was D&D night, because Thursday was later in the week, so people could feel like they could stay out a little bit longer. It wasn't Friday, so it wouldn't clash as much with like family or just generally going out with other friends. And it was the GM, i.e. was me 90% of the time. If I could make it, the game was on. And I ran with one player sometimes, I ran with two players sometimes, and then eventually we just got into the flow where it was part of everybody's schedule. But that group is now in a place where our lives are a bit more complicated, a bit more stressful. Work is a bigger issue for some folks. And it's
become so hotly contested.
Exactly. Like, this is what I'm scared of, is like, if we make a change to like Saturday fortnightly instead of every Thursday week to see if we can extend the length of the session because people aren't getting as tired or whatever the case is, it's just going to obliterate the consistency, because even if you say every second Saturday we're playing, but then a family thing might come up, or somebody might need to, like, do something for work,
that's my nanny's
or
birthday. I've got an engagement
exactly.
party.
Somebody's getting married. Yes, so that's kind of what I'm currently grappling with as well.
D&D is a college-aged man's game. It's man being human. It's very much. It's for people who, they have another life, but it's kind of loose.
Yeah.
You got a lot of free time. You got a lot of space. Everyone's on the same campus. Oh my goodness.
Well, that aside, let us jump into the news this week. News. That's my new news kind of intro.
Say that as a soundbite? You said every time.
Sure. You know what? If you remind me, because I'll almost certainly forget, I will do that every time.
Here's my promise. You've got that soundboard somewhere. You should save that as a sound, and every time you do it, and you press the soundboard button, and then it layers over time.
The problem is to use the soundboard button. The soundboard is only controlled by the studio producer in Riverside, and that's not me. That's Dante at the moment. So I don't have the soundboard.
Figure out your psychic connection with Dante.
You know what, Dante? Just make it happen. I'm kidding, Dante. I love you. All right, let us jump into news. The CEO of Hasbro, you know him, you love him. It's Chris Cox, is back talking about AI again. At a Goldman Sachs event. When I hear Goldman Sachs, I just think capitalism with a capital C. It's nothing against anybody involved. It's just Goldman Sachs sounds like the most capitalism organization that capitalism ever capitalized on in the history of capitalism. Anyway, to be honest, I don't think Chris is saying anything here that they haven't kind of said in the past. Talking about using AI, mostly machine learning based on AI or proprietary AI that, based on content that Hasbro already owns, as opposed to a chat GPT approach. I think we've discussed on this Lorecast before whether that's actually possible, if that's the way AI works, whether Hasbro would possibly own enough content to be able to train an AI model to be smart enough, for want of a better word, to be able to pop out responses to stimulus. Anyway, saying that they want to use proprietary AI, and that Chris is more interested in the playful elements of AI because the 30 to 40 people he regularly plays with, which also prompted the scheduling question, where does he find the time? All use AI somehow to develop their campaign, their character, their story ideas, and that Chris's preference for using AI in relation to D&D seems to be for user-generated content to streamline player introduction, emergent storytelling, rather than necessarily to produce content such as books. That was my read on it.
Do not take this as a defense necessarily, but I saw a lot of people online taking that 30 to 40 people who all use AI and saying, well, that's just a straight up lie. And I understand that sort of knee-jerk instinct, but again, not a defense, more of a realignment that's not the part that needs to be focused on. But
Sure.
I think that if we assume that he's not talking about like one or two ongoing campaigns, but just a lot of different, one-shots that pop up here and there. Like if I started counting the people that I play, semi-regularly with, I'd probably start getting up there too into numbers that sound a little bit ridiculous. And if you're living in the sort of CEO bubble, maybe you are dealing with a lot of people who like using AI a lot. Like if you're someone who's using AI, you probably know a lot of people who are using AI. So I'm just saying, let's realign. Let's not attack the kind of straw man over here. Let's look at the rest of the thing. Like to me, I would say this reads as a guy who's at an event where all the corporates are using the current buzzword, and the current buzzword is AI. And he's like, oh yeah, we use AI. Yeah, absolutely. Let me tell you all about the AI we're using,
I'm interested in the playful elements of huffing car exhaust. Dael, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, this is investor buzzword soup. And it's to the point where I can't even be mad about it in the way that I'm mad about, the usual Gen AI stuff. Weirdly enough, until they say otherwise, I trust Wizards when they say they won't use AI art in their books. They went to some not insignificant expense to strip out and recommission the AI art that got into the mix in Big B's and to excise it. However, my big problem with AI, even in the chatbot sense, right, in the sort of way that AI is kind of an inevitability. It's a new technology and people are going to use it, is its energy cost. I would have so much less problems with AI if look at the news story about how much water and energy it costs to run Grok, Twitter's chatbot. Or actually, this is the one case I will call it X. This is X's chatbot, Grok. It's the equivalent of a small nation for the Twitter chatbot that I've never heard anyone talk about. If every company is going to get in on this, is going to get in on using ChatGPT or whatever, we've got a mounting energy crisis. And as someone who's concerned about climate change and things like that, this is something we don't need right now. And so, if they manage to solve this problem, a lot of my concerns with AI will die down. But until that happens, I'll continue to be a grumpy old man yelling at clouds.
Speaking of a grumpy old man yelling at clouds, amen to every single thing that was said there. Right? I read this story. The first thing I saw was Goldman Sachs event. Goldman Sachs, the second largest investment banker in the world. You want to protest? Protest away. You know who you protest? You protest Goldman Sachs. You want to protest Hasbro? Go ahead. That's fine. Protest Goldman Sachs because they're the ones who are giving the money to the people who are doing the things that we don't like. And that's why Chris Cox can't say AI sucks. I don't know what he really believes. He may really believe that AI sucks, but as the CEO of a publicly traded company where the investors at Goldman Sachs are going to determine the price of the stock, he can't go in and say AI sucks and we're never going to touch it with a 10-foot pole because then Hasbro stock craters and they start firing people at Wizards of the Coast. So he has an obligation to say
don't do that a little bit anyway, but
they do it. They do it occasionally, yes. But it is a problem with the investment banker capitalistic society that we live in. Chris had to say all those things. He went far enough to say, we're not thinking about it in terms of replacing artists and writers. That probably cost the stock $2 a share because he said that, because they could save a lot of money by doing that. But he went that far to actually appease us, who he knew would be reading this and commenting on it later. So I don't like the system, but I also recognize the system. When I was working for a software company that contracted to NBC, the National Broadcasting Company, we were working on, this was 1990s, so pre-cell phones, pre-everything. We were working on internet applications that would let stockbrokers and traders see CEOs giving speeches rather than just reading their transcripts, because that's how important it was to those people, those stock traders, investors, to see a person saying it rather than just reading it, to catch up on any nuances that they might have. Now, since then, we have CNBC and we have all these business channels, but they didn't have those back then. So for like a year of my life, that it was trying to get this internet app up and running so that investors could watch stuff like this. That's how tuned in and fine-tuned this sort of investment bank zeitgeist is with just single words in, or how that word is phrased in a CEO statement.
That was some damn good cloud yelling.
Shawn, I think this really reveals kind of the power and the limitations of saber rattling on the internet, of making a fuss on Twitter, because as it turns out, people getting and I say this with love, people getting pissy on Twitter. I get pissy on Twitter. People bullying Wizards of the Coast on Twitter does get them to potentially mildly harm their stock prices by making public exceptions to generative AI art. But if you want real change in the way that I think most people who have a problem with this and are yelling about it on Twitter want to, there is an upper limit of how big a dragon you can needle with your voice on social media.
Yeah, and I never would tell people not to, because that's their right and that's their responsibility in some ways. But note scale and note the direction that maybe you can put your efforts to actually make change, as James said, rather than feeling good about, oh, we got them to replace this one piece of AI art that they didn't even know was AI art. We've shown them. Yeah, okay, you've shown them, and over here, there's a small nation not getting energy because elsewhere where we're not looking, this stuff is happening.
Indeed. Well, speaking of scary technology and Elon Musk, hey, pal, ooh. There was a story that came out a few days ago that a couple of people, maybe more than a couple, the number I read was 90, which doesn't sound particularly widespread, but maybe it's more than that, had their pre-orders for the new player's handbook through D&D Beyond cancelled, their physical pre-orders cancelled because the payments were not accepted, which appears, from what I was reading yesterday, maybe there's been further developments, but it appears to have largely been because of a PayPal technical error, most likely, which meant that payments failed, which meant that the pre-orders were cancelled. And Wizards of the Coast have basically asked folks to get in touch via a customer support ticket if they were affected. So that's open and shut, I guess. Speaking of shutting things and opening windows, Draw Steel, the MCDM game, has opened a window on their creator license. Because they have recently published on their website a creator license based on Backer Packet 1, which is a collection of Draw Steel rules that have been pushed out to backers. It's not the entire game yet, but it has been pushed out to backers, and they have said that you can create work for Draw Steel if you wish. You can create adventures. You can publish it anywhere. Any changes they make to this license, they can make at any time, but those changes don't retroactively apply to anything that you make now for Draw Steel. The wordage is incredibly open. The only things you can't do, it seems, is use MCDM-owned art. You can use it for inspiration, but you need to get your own art drawn or commissioned if you want to put art in your product. You can't violate or infringe on the intellectual property rights of any other third party. So you can't make a Draw Steel product with Wolverine in it, for example, or Darth Vader or some other intellectual property, which I have a question about in a moment. You also can't say that it's a Draw Steel product or make that you represent MCDM in any way, which is completely normal. That's what most third-party publishers of D&D do, is say that it is a 5e product, because they're not allowed to say it's a D&D product necessarily. So, all that being said, it's an incredibly open license, but it seems like an interesting about face to me, because correct me if I'm wrong, I was under the impression that MCDM had earlier said that they were not going to put out a creator license until the game was finished, because they didn't want people creating content for a game that had kind of shifting rule sets and shifting compatibility, I suppose, on future updates. So, I don't know if you have any more insight into this, Dael. I'm, not necessarily asking you that question directly, but
I wish I did have
you'll probably know more than
insight.
I do.
I haven't read the new thing yet, which I'm very sad about. I just haven't had the time yet. But I don't have clear answers. I can't enlighten or speak on their behalf or anything like that.
Of course.
I wonder whether part of the willingness to do it is that now that the first backer kit has gone out, the first backer packet has gone out, and so many people have access to it. A lot of people want to be making this stuff, but there aren't boundaries yet. So it's actually easier in a lot of ways to give them some boundaries to let them play and create the things that they want to create. Because I know that there's been a big sort of reaction of people wanting to get in there and homebrew stuff and make their own things for Draw Steel. And then on top of that, I wonder whether it's slightly less worrying on their end for them to be doing something like that, because much of the core sort of system is now in place. Things like before now, it was in flux. What kind of dice are we going to be using? You know, there was the 2d6 and the 2d10, and it like kind of shifted around for a while. But now they've gotten to a point in the timeline where they have to lock those things in so that production can happen on time. You know what I mean? So they can have the dice that were promised in the crowdfunder can be there ready for the crowdfunder, ready to go out. They had to make their decision. So a lot of the core systems are now much more solid than they previously were. So those are probably the two things that I would expect had a major influence on it. If I was to hazard a guess.
Sure.
If only
James,
we
Shawn, do you have
had
any thoughts?
people from MCDM on the show at any point
only
within the
we
last
could have asked.
2 weeks. Yeah, I think it's great. I think it's awesome. I think they give another benefit to being a backer. Now that you're a backer, you can get a little ahead of everyone else in making this stuff. I don't see it as a problem at all, and it's actually a pretty good thing.
Is anybody here excited to potentially design for it in future? I've kind of, given that they're so upfront about what that game is, it's a tactical combat cinematic game. It's about fighting monsters. It's heroic fantasy in its tone. You know, we've had a couple of questions through the Ghostfire Discord about like, would you ever transfer transformations to draw steel, or would you ever, you know, this, that, or the other? I'd have to take a much closer look at the system to know whether that would even be a possibility. But the question I would also be asking, particularly for Grim Hollow, this might be different for Ethereal Expanse or Aurora or one of our other settings, but does Draw Steel capture the grittiness of Grim Hollow through its mechanics is a question I would need to answer for myself before I would necessarily want to design for it. And that is setting specific, not necessarily system specific. But is anybody here excited to sink their teeth into designing some things for Draw Steel?
I mean, sure, I have no doubt in my mind that it will happen. That's just kind of how I love things. At the moment, I think I'm still just kind of letting all the new stuff roll in because it's not like, bam, here's all the content. And I can look at it and go, well, this is what I want to do with it. I think I haven't been hit with that urge just yet. But I have been a little bit. I've got that little sparkle in the back of my brain somewhere. I think because of hearing about the sort of the starter adventure that was set up for their Gen Con appearance, that made me excited. Made me go, ooh, what other kind of adventures would happen in there? It makes me want to kind of write my own adventures for it. But yeah.
Can I just get a gig saying draw steel the way Matt Colville does? Draw steel.
Yes, you could, James. Yes.
Yes.
With your voice, yeah.
Absolutely.
We need that, in fact. Like, if they ever do any sort of cinematic trailer or anything like that, we just need it to finish with James saying the phrase.
No, they'll get like Matt to do that.
Not
then a
finishing
shing sound, and then the logo appears, but like a shine goes across it. I've got it now.
It'll be like the Australian Zoids theme, which was literally just Zoids.
Yeah.
So if Ghostfire does anything for Draw Steel, Ben, call me. I'll take
Draw
that.
Steel. And then music. Draw Steel. It's going to be great.
But we're not allowed, if Ghostfire did anything for Draw Steel, we wouldn't be allowed to call it Draw Steel from this license.
Right?
Shadow
CDM
Steel.
people.
Draw Shadow Steel. Oh my God.
Yes.
All right, we're doing it.
Oh, it's happening. It's happening.
Here's a question, actually, that's just occurred to me, because I think it's an interesting one. We've talked in the past about how, you know, since early last year, there's been a bigger fracturing or a bigger shakeup in the RPG industry of people creating different systems, whether or not it's kind of a fork of 5e, which a lot of them are, as to borrow a term from Colville himself. In terms of, you know, like DC 20 is a fork of 5e and not Draw Steel, that's the opposite. Tales of the Valiant is a fork of 5e, but there are, you know, other like the Critical Role one, whose name is escaping me right now as I try to rapidly recall the names of all these games. Daggerheart, thank you. Came to me right as you said it. Is there an advantage for MCDM or any company in getting out ahead of having an audience create content for your game to get a larger proliferation of content for your game than, you know, for example, Daggerheart or Pathfinder or whatever other game, kind of trying to keep things relatively locked in, whether it's to their own marketplace or just not having a license yet to publish anything. Is that kind of a marketplace advantage?
Yeah, in my opinion, yeah.
In a limited market, because the people who are just dabblers, they aren't going to know to go anywhere other than where they already are to find content. What might be more important is getting actual plays out there.
Sure.
So people can watch the game being played and learn what they want and even be told where to go to get more content for that.
It's an advantage insofar as excitement about your game is an advantage, about there being a critical mass of attention and people talking about your game is an advantage. A lot of people who buy RPGs make for RPGs, or they have an audience who they influence, right? And the type of influence that an RPG creator has is different from the influence that a more traditional so-called influencer would have, right? Someone who makes actual plays or YouTube shorts or TikToks or something like that, just because the audiences tend to be pretty separate. I think the number of people who are really hardcore about crunchy rules that might get excited about Draw Steel's tactical combat is different from the people who, say, watch Ginny D's videos and get excited about, the social aspect or these sort of skit style videos that she likes to put out. And so casting a very broad net of people to cover all of your, I don't know what it's called, your interest groups, I guess, right? There's sort of a corporate aspect to this.
Yeah, I wonder if like changing gears suddenly into the YouTube kind of side of this, it's something that interesting that has sparked up in my brain is how would a YouTuber go if they wanted to tie their brand to Draw Steel in the way that certain YouTubers tie their brand to Pathfinder or to D&D or to, anything else. And D&D certainly is the most popular one of these to, if you put D&D in your SEO to the point that a lot of Pathfinder YouTubers will say like, better than D&D, this Pathfinder hack that like blah, 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 just to get D&D into their SEO. At the moment, I'm looking at miniature agnostic war games. I'm looking at Ghostfire, and I've just recently discovered Rangers of Shadow Dark or something like that. And so I'm looking for YouTube content to tell me about these games, which the creators of these games don't have a lot of content on. And so I'm finding, these channels that have a couple of views based on people searching for these same games. Any YouTuber that wants to create Draw Steel content is competing directly with MCDM's own videos, which I think as a consumer who's being introduced to this game for the first time would just instantly go to those instead. Is there incentive for YouTubers to create content for MCDM in terms of gaining views? Dael, go.
Hello. First of all, it's a cycle. Like so okay. Tying all my thoughts together. So we're talking about fandom and fan behaviors. All right. The way that people create in response to your thing is a huge factor in its success. I would maybe even, if I had more time to like structure an argument, I would possibly argue that it's like one of the most important things. And when I say create, yes, I'm covering the very artistic expressions of literally art, literally fan fiction. So this is like beyond just TTRPG, just in general. But also that goes on to explanation and educational type content on YouTube, explaining how does this game work? How do we, engage with this thing? Even down to people talking on Twitter, people replying in YouTube comments, people talking around, the water cooler at work. All of those things are an act of creation in response, right? But then in order to keep that cycle going, you're having to put out more things for them to talk about. They're not going to talk about the same thing forever, so you have to be coming out with new things. So that's kind of, you have to feed into that life cycle, but you have to find the right pace for it, is kind of a major element. But when we're talking about YouTube creators and the idea of particularly in extremely niche areas, right? You're dealing with the long tail effect that I've brought up a couple of times, which is that, and in fact, if you're looking to find success on YouTube as a first time creator, the sage advice is that you have to niche down, because if you go to a niche topic the more niche you get, the fewer people are going to be talking about that thing. And so everyone who is looking for that thing is going to find your video. And the thing about YouTube that you were fundamentally wrong about just now, Benjamin, is that you're not competing with MCDM. Because yes, MCDM's videos are going to come up and you're going to click on the one that shows up first, which is going to be the one with the most views that shows up as like, yes, this was the most relevant and the most people liked it. So YouTube is going to put it first. But after you've watched that video, you're going to have the videos by other people. You know what I mean? Like we're dealing with the niche subject matter that not that many people are making videos on. So eventually that's all spread out. There's no limit on YouTube to how many videos you can watch, to how many channels you can subscribe to. So the smaller your kind of pocket of the internet, the more you're gonna get there. But
but
once you get super, super niche, once you get all the way down, it's like, yes, every single person who wants to know about how, Himalayan nose whistling works, all 6 of those people are going to find your stuff, but there's also only 6 of them. You know what I mean? So there is kind of the downside of niching down is that the more you niche, the smaller the audience. So what happens with niching down is that the reason it is something that is successful and that is good practice is that it leads to quicker growth, but you plateau sooner. So that's another reason why this kind of feed, this cycle of content is very, very important, because you have to be kind of generating enough stuff that other people are generating enough stuff at the same pace. Otherwise, you are going to run out of things and your audience is going to kind of hollow out.
Sure. The one thing I would maybe push back on a little bit is you're right. There's no limitation to the number of YouTube channels you can subscribe to, but everybody has limited time.
Everybody has limited time.
I'm just going off what my own behaviors would be, and I can't assume that is for everybody, right?
I just don't know,
to make
man.
a generalization,
as the person who's making like a solid 2/3 of the MCDM sort of draw steel related videos right now, because I'm the one editing the Q&As and putting them up. There's maybe one video comes out in between those sometimes, and I'm doing all the shorts. I know what the pace is. I know how many videos are. You're not competing with that much. I just don't want people to be scared off from making stuff. Also at this stage, the kind of content they're making is different. You know what I mean? It's like people who make D&D videos aren't competing directly with the D&D YouTube channel, because the D&D YouTube channel is making corporate as hell videos that people aren't. You know what I mean? Like, and that's not the same thing with MCDM, but it's just you're making a different kind of video. And so automatically you're a different product. It's like my D&D videos are a different kind of video from Ginny D's. But, it's like, even if they're closely related, you're still serving a slightly different niche. Anyway.
Dael, you brought up an interesting point that I've been thinking of this whole time. When it comes to the creators of the game having their own video presence, D&D style, for example, is a very sort of corporate style of PR video, very broadly applicable. Do you think it's possible, or do you think it's likely for an official channel kind of in this day and age, someone like Critical Role or MCDM, that were kind of built on the back of a media brand to begin with rather than their RPG? Do you think it's possible for that kind of video to eat the lunch of a smaller creator?
I think it's possible. It's a really tricky thing. The closer you get to being official, and this is maybe not directly answering the question, but the closer you get to being official, I think there's kind of a bizarre, psychological element that comes into play, almost like a tall poppy syndrome thing, where it's like, you're telling me to like this person as a personality, but it just doesn't feel real. It doesn't feel like someone off their own bat going out and making their own thing because they love talking about it. And very occasionally you find sort of an official host who was brought on who can kind of cross that barrier. Wizards is in an interesting place now where they are either firing or chasing off a lot of those people that people have connected with on different mediums. So that's an interesting thing. Because, you can have these personalities that develop that people do attach to in a similar way to other creators. But I don't know. It's such an interesting question, because a creator is always, in my opinion, a little bit of their product is personality and brand and themselves, as well as whatever they're talking about. Your brand is never going to be just D&D. Your brand is going to be me plus D&D. And so in that way, it's very difficult for anyone to swoop in and take your exact thing, you know? But it's also a difficult thing to make be a successful product. So I think it is possible for them to eat the lunch, but I don't know that it's easy. Yeah. I also just want to throw in there that I do not literally make all of the MCDM shorts. I said that, but I was being facetious. I was exaggerating. I make a lot of them for them, but I don't make all of them.
Yeah, and for the record, I wasn't trying to discourage folks from making MCDM content or Pathfinder or any other, you know, DC20, Tales of the Valiant. Yeah. It's just interesting to watch the trends on YouTube, because when the OGL stuff first happened, a lot of D&D YouTubers scattered to the 7 winds of other systems to see if they could find success there. And then kind of gradually a lot of them came back to D&D, because it's the same in the wargaming space. Is people will try to talk about other war games that are not Warhammer also, 40K frankly, fundamentally, and always have to come back.
You also frankly get used to a certain level of, you know, viewership, a certain level of income. Maybe you're not prepared to take that
absolutely.
hit, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, YouTube, being a professional YouTuber is a business at the end of the day. You know?
Like, especially once you're hitting that zone of creatordom where you are kind of starting to become reliant on that income, but it's not like also, in defense of what you were saying, it's worth noting that MCDM is in a different place to a lot of these companies, except for, you know, things like DC20, where it's like, this is a YouTuber, someone who became known and successful for making YouTube videos. I mean, he was successful in other avenues and game design as well, obviously, but you get what I'm saying. And then now is doing the business thing. But when they make videos, you're not going to look at Matt Colville making a video about Draw Steel and go, oh, well, this is just corporate bullshit, because he's presenting it the same way he presented everything. And he presented that way as a YouTuber. You know what I mean? There's that connection. Having said that, he's also kind of stepping a little bit more back into the background when it comes to MCDM and Draw Steel versus the Matt Colville channel, because there's that separation, not wanting to be the face of the company and have the company reliant on his personal presentation.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it is, speaking from experience, a remarkably hard thing to come from the other direction.
It's worth saying as well, though, that I don't know whether it's by total fluke or what, but like Intricasso is one of the most dynamic and listenable stream talkerers I've ever seen. And Willy Boo is incredibly entertaining. Like that team are just kind of dynamic people.
Yes. And, you know, speaking from experience, we you know, Ghostfire has tried to do the same thing from the direction of starting as a publishing company first, that then created a YouTube channel and a podcast to try and engage audience, you know, from that side of things. And I don't know, hopefully we're doing it well, but and people find it listenable and all that sort of thing. But yeah, I don't know. It's just anytime we start talking about YouTube and like audience behaviors and how to find audience, I always find that stuff incredibly fascinating for what I hope are obvious reasons.
I hope that the people who listen to us don't get the sense that, especially when it comes to Ghostfire, right, we're not just shilling a product, because that's the thing that really kills people's interest. So we can't see beyond our own noses. And I like to think that our noses are very see-beyondable.
I'm here to keep us humble and grounded by not working for Ghostfire in any official capacity.
That's been the biggest challenge on our YouTube channel, honestly, is like saying to people, like, I didn't create Grim Hollow. I didn't invent the setting. But genuinely, I love this shit. Like, I love this setting. I love dark fantasy D&D more than I should for reasons that we've discussed on this podcast before about loving something that is owned by a corporate entity. And so every video that we put out is me thinking, you know, whether I'm working with Shawn on something as well or whatever, but I'm thinking, how would I run my game? What would I love to do at my table? How do I do it at my table? How do I use the content that Ghostfire produces in a way that I find fun? Because, you know, the Grievous Wounds video wasn't just about the Grievous Wounds table that we have in the current Grimhollow campaign guide, it was how have I used this to extrapolate on that and building that audience trust coming from the opposite end where MCDM came from, which was YouTuber first into publisher. We were publisher first, wanting to create a YouTube presence to engage with our audience. Building that trust has been incredibly difficult and a slow process. And we get comments that kind of reflect the fact that, you know, people still see us as a publisher. And even within the YouTuber world, I don't think I'm really seen as a YouTuber in the same way that a lot of other YouTubers kind of see themselves or each other because of the association with Ghostfire. So, and it's interesting seeing other companies kind of take a swing at the same thing and be like, you know, let's try, you know, create some sort of media platform based on our content and put it out there. Anyway, I'm going to start to get self-reflect. I'm going to start to get leery-eyed soon. Leery-eyed, listy-eyed, misty-eyed, whatever. Anyway.
I like wisty-eyed.
Wistful.
I like wisty-eyed.
There's some expression I'm looking for in there. Speaking of creating things for third parties, I just thought this was a cool thing, so I threw it on there onto the run sheet quickly. Next Adventure Design Jam. DriveThru RPG is holding a game jam during September. The due date for your game, if you want to submit or for your adventure, more accurately, is the 30th of September, so there's only half a month left. They are asking for adventure submissions that specifically continue a starter or quick start adventure from a number of different systems / settings from publishers that are participating in this game jam that DriveThru RPG have some sort of bespoke license with. So, for example, just using the D&D example because it's the one I know the best, your challenge is to create an adventure that could continue from the Lost Mines of Phandelver to be published on DM's Guild. Lost Mines was the example used, but I assume perhaps you could also do it for Stormwreck Isle or there's a third one, isn't there, that I'm not remembering. But other participants include Chaosium, Free League, Modiphius, Green Ronin. You can take one of their starter adventures, a starter adventure for Call of Cthulhu, and create the next leg of that adventure if you want as well. This is obviously a fun way for DriveThru RPG to try boosting sales and engagement through their platforms, because the way that you submit is you publish your content. If it was for D&D, it would be through DM's Guild specifically. But then you go to, what was the website? medium.com/DriveThru to get all the details, because there's a bit of finicky stuff you have to do to get your submission seen from wherever you publish it. But I thought this was cool. I just thought this was a cool community challenge. Has anybody else seen, heard, know anyone participating, want to participate?
I think it's really cool, especially from a community point of view, because I can't say too much about DriveThru or say Chaosium's DriveThru partnership, but the DM's Guild has been awash in hastily generated AI garbage. I'll be mean about it. I think it's a lot of garbage. Stuff that, it clearly is lightly edited and just kind of thrown through ChatGPT or whatever. And it means that it's accelerated a problem the DM's Guild has had for a very long time, which is just there's too much for any one person to sure. comprehend, let alone read. And so having these sort of moderated, structured, and what's the word I'm looking for here? Curated showcases of people's creations, I think that's an awesome way to actually get eyes on something you've made, which has been the biggest problem with DM's Guild for years now.
As some of the earliest well-recognized products on the DM's Guild did exactly what this is doing. Take the product and move it along the adventure timeline. Give me a sequel. Give me another section within this adventure that, maybe there's a good dungeon here as you travel from this city to this city in the adventure. Let's put a dungeon in there. And I think I've written 4 different versions of something that happens after Lost Mine. And it's a great way for new designers to design with a constraint and learn how to focus and create something with those little bits of limitations that are so necessary sometimes for true creativity.
I love a game jam. I think they are great. this feels like the spirit of Gamer Rimo is still out there living somewhere in the hills, where I set it free because I didn't have time to do it again. But it's the kind of thing that I just think sparks so much creativity and productivity. Yeah. You know what I mean? Putting these constraints, like Shawn was saying, is such an effective way of the number of times that I and other people have just been like, oh, I have this idea for such and such a thing, but you never get round to it. But just going, hey, man, until this date, just work on that thing. Get it done. Done is better than nothing. And getting it out there. And I just think I love seeing the stuff that comes out of this. And I'm excited to see them running something like it because I don't know. It fills me with inspiration. Seeing all these creative minds just kind of getting into the communitas of the thing. I enjoy it.
For sure. I think it also provides folks, if you've run Lost Mines of Phandelver or any other starter adventure and you're kind of like, what's next? I've looked at running, I think there's a Call of Cthulhu starter adventure. If this is the Call of Cthulhu starter adventure, I remember there's something about a cave with a monster in it and kind of like an old western little town that you wander into. I started prepping that during lockdown and then we never ended up running it. But what happens next when you're starting with a new system you're not familiar with is super helpful. Whether new players are going to really discover these easily, brand new players to these systems because they're not necessarily in the third-party space of DriveThru RPG yet. But maybe, GMs that are deeper in the nerdom, introducing new players and kind of finding fun adventures to run them through subsequent to the starter adventure.
It will be really interesting to see what this does do for discoverability on DriveThru RPG. Because like James was saying,
sure.
It's never been a particularly friendly platform for discoverability, particularly if you don't have an external following. Because you kind of, you show up on that new releases sort of scroller for, half an hour and then you disappear into the ether forever. And the search function is bad. Let's just call it what it is. It is not a good search function. So unless you're getting those sales and sticking in the hot products Rolodex, then you're kind of screwed. But something like this where it's like, hey, click on this section and we're just going to give them all to you right there. That could be a good sort of approach to start looking into for DriveThru RPG to fix that kind of lingering issue.
And maybe this is overly optimistic, but I have some hope that by partnering, well, actually, Ben, let me ask you this. Is DriveThru officially partnering with these publishers, or are they kind of just rolling on their own thing?
No, I don't think it's like an official partnering or anything like that. I mean, like I said, there were too many rules of the competition for me to be able to memorize them all or throw them into our run sheet, so people can go check out the website. The competition is called, if it's easier just Googling it, the Next Adventure Design Jam with DriveThru RPG, medium.com/DriveThru, THRU, not the proper spelling.
And to be clear, it's not a competition. They're just going to bundle these together to put into a package so you can, with other people, show off your work in this vein. And if you go
by the way, I like more for game jams than competition. Sorry, go ahead.
But if you go to the site that Ben has pointed us to, there is a filter that will link you to all of the different starter sets for all of the different games that you can use. And there's, I think, well over 100 different starter sets that they're showing off and asking you to continue. So you pick a game, there's probably a starter set there for you to go with.
Which I didn't know. Like, that's kind of cool for, getting exposure on games. Like, everybody knows about the DMs Guild, right? In theory, everybody of a certain level down in the hobby, through the hobby trumpet, so to speak.
The hobby I thought you were going for the iceberg, but no, the hobby trumpet. I love it.
I like hobby trumpet.
Yeah, the hobby trumpet's a term I learned from the painting phase, which is a wargaming painting podcast. And basically the idea is that I'm going to try and make a trumpet with my hands, and most people are on the outside of the trumpet, but the deeper in you get, the more you find out about other things, but the audience size is getting smaller as it gets in. Anyway, and so where are you making your content for? Are you making it for the outside of the hobby trumpet or the inside of the hobby trumpet? Which kind of ties into the YouTube discussion we were having before. But anyway, I didn't realize that some of these games necessarily had creator licenses or creator spaces to publish, you know, that allowed you to use content from those games in the same way that the DMs Guild does. So, yeah, that's kind of cool. Speaking of starter adventures, creating things and shilling, the Grim Hollow Kickstarter is only 2 weeks away, almost to the date, launching in 2 weeks and like 12 hours from this very point. And I'm going to throw a link into the chat. I'm going to announce a little bit early, we are actually including starter adventures as part of that Kickstarter. So if you are looking for more Grim Hollow adventure content, or if you're looking to start a new campaign in Grim Hollow, or if you just want more startery sort of stuff, we are doing 5 adventures set in each of the 5 realms or main nations of Grim Hollow, which will all be at level 3. They're all starter adventures. But you will be able to use those. You can run them consecutively as one sort of like little campaign, or you can, you know, pick one as the seed of your next adventure. People have been asking for more Grim Hollow adventure content. So that's going to be part of the Kickstarter at the tier levels, depending on what tier you back. Go check it out. I'm enjoying creating for there. Shawn, how are you finding the process at the moment? What are you working on currently for the Grim Hollow Kickstarter?
I am still going through regional content. I am working with the subclass creators to create more subclasses and maybe even more subclasses and maybe even more subclasses. And and oh, what am I not doing? I'm looking through all of the material now for the 2024 book that will need to be updated either slightly or completely, and how that's going to interact with new subclasses. Did I mention subclasses? So, and of course, the adventures that we will be creating will need to be looked at and adjusted and coordinated with all the other content we're making. I am a busy, busy little man.
I feel you. As I'm currently writing kind of pitches for what those adventures will be, which I am then making a video about that, which will be out next week, that people, if they want a closer look at what those adventures will be. But I am subsequently also looking at the subclasses. We have 2 fantastic writers who worked on the previous Grim Hollow Player's Guide come back to work on the new subclasses for the new Player's Guide. And it is a lot of fun, kind of like, you know, what about this idea? What about this idea? Well, this cleric idea maybe could be used over here as a wizard because that, you know, works there, but that wizard concept kind of works really well for this paladin idea we have, and these 2 are kind of the same idea, so let's fold them together, but maybe split these 2 apart. You know, it's very fun ensuring that these different subclasses don't tread on the toes of a transformation or a heritage or a, you know, somewhere else that they could kind of be realized.
And since some of the subclasses from the player's handbook have changed, right? We may have created stuff to fill in gaps in the core subclasses, and now those have been tweaked. So we have to, well, are we stepping on anything there? Do we have to move in a different direction with something new, or even something that we've already worked on and are updating? So it's it is a process. It is an iterative process, and we are iterating quite frequently.
Yeah, indeed.
It's a weird feeling looking at this from the outside in, because I'm getting so hyped hearing you guys talk about it. I'm kind of loving not working on this book because I get to go through the hype cycle as you guys hype it up.
I was gonna say, James, stay on the line. Maybe you and I will talk if you want to get a bit of a peek behind the curtain, a bit more of a peek behind the curtain.
Call me Hannah Montana, because that sounds like the best of both worlds.
I had another thought about YouTube. Ben, this is another reason why you're wrong. So because what we weren't talking about, of course, as well, is the algorithm, is that if you're dealing in a niche subject, the algorithm isn't going to serve you as much, even though the searchability on YouTube means that people will find you. But having a sort of, I don't know, like a pilot fish in MCDM making these videos and that getting lots of views means the algorithm will go, oh yeah, videos that had these specific metadata key factors already did well, so let's push that a little bit more. So that's what I mean when I say that you're not competing with MCDM, you're not competing with other channels in your niche, because you're feeding each other. You know, it's like the number of audience members that get to my channel via Ginny D. You know, it's they come in through. Yeah. Anyway,
it is interesting going into the back annals of the algorithm of the analytics and seeing what other YouTube channels your viewers are watching, because YouTube floats that to you. It says like people are generally watching these other channels. And sometimes I look at that and I'm like, yeah, that sounds about right. And sometimes I look at that and I'm like, really? People, all right. I mean, you
Like,
know, whatever people's diverse interests are.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I really thought this was going to be a stacked listener email
DM
question.
Rollins in chat says the word is co-competitors, and I like that.
That is nice. Speaking of emails, you can email James. I haven't asked you in a while. What's the email address?
That would be podcast@ghostfiregaming.com. You got to get up pretty early in the morning to beat me, Ben.
You were quick on that. And this question coming from Emu, not an emu, but a person who signed their email as Emu. Do you world build in-game laws of magic, or are they too restrictive to players being able to use their character? And let me elaborate on what I mean by laws of magic. I don't necessarily mean the physics of magic, you know, the imagined physics of magic. I mean or how magic works. I mean like laws based around how arcane folk are allowed to wield magic within the setting. Emu uses a Dungeons of Drakkenheim example, the Edicts of Lumen, which are present in Drakkenheim. Grimhollow obviously features the Arcanist Inquisition, who fear spellcasting and see it as an abomination. The Witcher, there you go, there's your Witcher watch for the episode, has policies around that. I believe the rules in the Witcher world are that mages are never allowed to be rulers of anywhere because they're considered too powerful, but they generally take positions as advisors to kings and queens and rulers of different nations. Do you use these? Do you like them, or are they too restrictive to players, or do they add a lot of flavor if they're used well?
I have a lot of love in my heart for these. I think it adds a lot to the culture of a setting, right? Sometimes it's just not relevant enough to bother with, but when it's there, it can be really fun. I like to use them as not a thing to like bludgeon your players with or punish them with, but it's just a thing for them to think about. It's like, okay, there is like a difference to being a wizard, to being a warlock, to being a sorcerer, and like how you fit into the world, I find to be really fun. And it's also a fun thing for a player to engage with. If you say, hey, it's illegal to be a warlock, and so then they get to, if they enjoy that, if they go, oh, cool, so I'm going to pretend that I'm a wizard and blah, blah, you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of fun role play juice to be had there if that's what they're looking for. But I think, as usual, it all comes down to a conversation with that player and figuring out what they want from something. Because if they don't care about that at all, if they just want to be boopity boop, zip zap boing, home alone with wizards, like maybe don't spend that much time on it because they just want to fling fireballs around the place.
I like the point you bring up there, Dael, because in my first ever D&D campaign, or rather the first one I ever DM'd, I already had kind of a chip on my shoulder about D&D magic. I was like, this needs to have a societal impact. And so I put in, you know, Baby's First DM's version of Prejudice Against Mages into the setting, right? People kind of dislike magic for vague reasons of it was scary and they didn't understand it, so you couldn't be seen casting arcane spells out in public. And I think just about every first-time GM that cares about the sort of distinction does that. And my fellow players, one person really liked it, and they liked it so much they played a fighter because they wanted to steer clear of it. They loved the world building and they didn't want to engage with it, except as, you know, part of the in-group. And the one person who just really wanted to be a wizard and be a cool spell slinger hated it. Because that was not the sort of fantasy that she was gunning for. And I was too inexperienced of a DM to realize what was going on there. But with the benefit of hindsight, it's exactly what you're talking about, Dael. It's me building a world for kind of conceptual reasons rather than for the concrete reason of, will this make my game more fun for my players?
There's a meme worthy thing that players say when they do something that is horrifying or terrible at the table, or that no one would like, and they say it with me, but that's what my character would do. And everyone hates that. Now think of yourself as the game master. Just think of yourself as another player. And think of you saying, but that's what my world would do. Totally fine to say, think of the ramifications of what that means for your players. And if you're using that's what my world would do to dampen down people's fun, then that's where the conversations need to be had and come up with a way to still keep that flavor, but make it fun for the player rather than a drawback for the player.
That is an incredibly good flip of perspective that GMs should carry. This guy, I'm pointing at myself for audio listeners, this guy in particular, I want to tell a fun story, but that highlights the point of why there should be magical laws in dark fantasy settings specifically. But you do need to flag that with your players. And that story is that the players went down, they wanted to talk to a body, so they used Speak with Dead, and I described how it horrifically kind of thrashed around and rose up, and some death-rattling voice came through the corpse, and the mortician ran from the building in abject terror, having never seen this happen before. And then when the party got outside of the morgue, there was a mob there waiting for them to be like, you got to get out of our town because you just talked to a corpse and that's not natural. And the party were like, all right, we're going to fight this mob. And I was like, okay. And one of the party members cast Thunderwave, low-level spell, but described as just like obliterating 2 or 3 people, crushing their bones inside their body and sending a crack up the side of a building. You know, there's the equivalent of like a little localized earthquake, people inside the building kind of shouting in fear and surprise and retreating to get out as quick as they could. And after he cast Thunderwave, I think it kind of dawned on everybody like, oh, maybe these villagers have a point. Maybe magic is kind of terrifying and dangerous, and we should be considerate about how we wield this magic against a mob of scared villagers. But you got to make sure that your party are down for that sort of storytelling, you know, in a dark fantasy world. The other thing that I'll quickly say is I think to make these work particularly in 5e as a system where the magic is very kind of like, yeah, you just click your fingers, bibbity bop, this thing happens. You know, you're invisible now. You send a thunderwave, you make a fireball, like whatever. Zip zap boing. Boopy yeah, boop. All the things, abracadabra. You know, you got your 2 spoons. You is introducing consequences for magic that are not necessarily written into the rules. Dael and I have had our spar on the implications of necromancy before. Mm-hmm. And
Ben yes, the an honorable man.
Yeah, exactly. The necromancy spells as written, like Speak with Dead, does not in any way suggest in the rules that it is particularly horrifying to witness. But I think, you know, accepting in a dark fantasy setting that, you know, this is going to, you know, necromancy is a horrifying thing. Does the soul become trapped in the corpse after the spell is finished? Or is the body instead filled with 1,000 souls that are all trying to claw their way back to the mortal realm, and you have to figure out what answers are actually coming from the real person who used to inhabit this corpse? You know, finding spooky extra ways of or extra consequences for these spells helps make the spellcasting feel legitimately dangerous, and therefore there should be some laws around these things, as opposed to just like, I've had players be like, why is everybody so upset? I just cast Thunderwave. It's a 1st level spell. I don't get why everyone's so upset, you know.
I think that summed it up pretty well.
And that that sounds like that's the piece of this episode of the Eldritch Lorecast. Yep. So if you've enjoyed this episode, let me just rub together my call to action hands. You can, if you're watching it on YouTube, give this video a like, hit the like button. If you're listening on Spotify or anywhere else, you can leave a comment on Spotify.
I'm mind blown. Who knew that? Mine.
I think Spotify just changed how people leave comments because we've been getting a lot more comments recently. I do read them. I am getting the questions there. Keep leaving them there. Stars, all that stuff's really grateful. But if you want to see us live, then you'd have to travel to Australia. But if you want to watch us through Twitch, you can do that 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on a Monday, 4 p.m. Pacific, or it is Tuesday morning, 9 a.m. In Australia because of time zone, timey-wiminess. I've been Ben Byrne here with Dael Kingsmill, Shawn Merwin, James Hake, and we will be back next week with another episode of the Eldritch Lorecast. As always, Dante's the editor. Ba-ba-da, ba-ba-da. Ba-ba-ba-da. Ba-ba-ba-da.
Bada bing, bada boom.
Extra babada in there.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
That's off.
Bibbidi-ba. Zibbidi-zoo. Ba-ba-doo-ba-ba.
Like da-ka-da-ka-ka.
Skitterbidi-bidi-bidi-bidi-bidi.
That's some good wisdom.
I
Just
tried
have a
to
little dog of
participate.
wisdom bit
Thank
after
you.
every podcast.